Hey everyone, Mr. Weinland here. Wrapping up the chapter 13. Looking forward to recording our next chapter. We're going to get into the Renaissance in our next chapter. Real quick, just kind of want to go over a little bit about the power of the church. We kind of briefly talked about the church. We've kind of gone into it in detail in certain aspects, especially when we got into monasticism when talking about monks. Talked a little bit briefly about it when we talked about Christianity in Rome. So we also briefly talked about in this chapter, but we're going to kind of get more and more into the power of the church in this section and also in the next chapter. My goal for the next chapter, because of what we're dealing with, a pandemic and the coronavirus, I'm thinking about doing a kind of a brief lesson about the Black Death and kind of give you a sense of what's going on there, how it's compared to the coronavirus. Very different, but there's some similarities, and I think when after I teach that lesson, I think I can then get us on to the Renaissance. But until then, we're gonna learn about the power of the church. Let's talk about it. So let's kind of jump into it a little bit, into this lesson about what it's about. Obviously, the church, the Christian church. Obviously, we kind of been briefly talking about the Pope and and the Pope's powers. The Pope has had a lot of powers throughout its time, or his time. So many popes, different types of popes, but all men from the Catholic Church, and all who have been spiritual leaders, going all the way back to the Middle Ages. Very powerful figures, individuals who controlled a lot of kingdoms because of their influence. We do see that manneralism, feudalism encouraged a lot of local loyalties. We see that because of these loyalties, it's played out in a lot of the Christian faith and beliefs. We see across Europe, even going back to the Middle Ages, the spiritual community of Christendom has this belief on loyalty, especially loyal to God. And we see that this is going to affect a lot of different aspects of Christian lives, change mostly all of Europe. We see that this becomes a big deal in how we go about things. But primarily, the role of the church, even during this time of the Middle Ages, going into the 1400s, we see that a lot of the kings and nobles, have a lot of respect and have a lot of religious practices, or events based on the religious ceremony. So a lot of big events like weddings, deaths, or funerals, births are all played out throughout their faith. We see monks acted as peacemakers at times. They prayed for safety for the rulers, the armies when they go into battle. We do see that church officials served as teachers. They weren't just there to, hey, I'm just going to make sure that your faith's okay. They actually were teachers as well. They were record keepers. The clergymen had a big influence in the communities and really helped those going through a lot in that time. Right around the 1000s, the influence of the church increased dramatically. We see a great upwelling of piety, a level of devotion in Europe. This is your answer number 26. The church's influence increased around 1000 because of what? Well, right there, great upwelling of piety, or that is level of devotion in Europe. The fact that the level of devotion is going to cause the church to really grow and have an influence into not only in the church but society, that they're going to be able to dictate a lot of what the kings do. So we see that a lot of individuals who were followers or are members of the feudal system or the manorial system were big church leader or church members, and these church members became more and more devout to the religious leaders, and we start to see more of a participation, an increase in attendance at church. We see a lot of religious orders grow. Again, if you need to write down these answers, feel free to pause and just do what you need to do to get the answers, and then write them down later. But we see that also, that this devotion, the sense of devotion, is going to help not only bring a lot of people to God, but it's also going to bring some improvement to society. We see a thing called the papacy. The papal power is starting to grow. And in the 900s and 1000s, the Pope had little authority at one point in time. I mean, not that the Pope wasn't important. The Pope was an important figure, but mostly the Pope was in charge of just its clergy, just the members of the church and or the clergy. And basically, what he sees is that the Pope is going to help make bigger decisions throughout time. And we see that the papacy was not really held in high regard at one point in time, but certain things would change. Devotion, piety, the increase of devotion to the church is going to change things. Also, we see that nobles are going to be concerned with their own power as well. One of those individuals, and your definition is right here, Leo the Ninth, and I would probably write the middle point if I were you, and I'll pull this back just a little bit. But in 1049, we see Leo the Ninth really change a lot of things. And we see that he comes to power. He's a clever individual. He's very dedicated to the papacy and bringing strong power to it. But he believed that Europe's clergy had become corrupt at this point in time, and he realized that even with its importance, it needed to be reformed. This was a big deal. So I would probably write this down as your definition. If you need to pause and write it down, that's great for Leo the Ninth. He was mostly concerned with the simony, which was buying and selling of church offices by the bishops. So that became a big deal for Leo, and he steps in. He's like, look, we got to take advantage. We got to get this under control and stop all these selling of these positions. We do see that ultimately there's excommunications that are added. Certain bishops who have been corrupt are basically excommunicated. That means cast out of the church. That's not a good thing. If you're excommunicated from the church, you're done from the church. A lot of times, it's very rare that individuals who are excommunicated from the church can get back into the church. So what we do see is that the Pope is really laying the ground game and really showing like, look, we need to kind of get this taken care of. I'm going to see if I can find a quick picture of Leo, Leo the Ninth, see what he might have looked like in his time. We don't know exactly what he looks like, but this is good old Leo. Hey, look at Leo. Hey, Leo. Loving the beard, Leo, as my computer is taking forever to load it. But there we go. Now, again, we don't know for sure if Leo looks more like that or more like that. But we do know that I would probably say he probably looked more like that. You can see in this picture here. It's kind of hard. You can see the beard here with all the, so. But Leo played a big role in the power game in the history. Oh, that's the wrong slideshow. All right, here we go. So, but he did excommunicate a lot of corrupt bishops and put some other punishments in the Middle Ages. So we start to see a change in Christianity, and we see that a person excommunicated could not take part in Eucharist. And could not be saved. So you did not want to be excommunicated because that means you could not take part in communion. So like communion is the bread and the wine, or the juice and the bread. It's today's churches, unless you go to the Catholic Church, I'm pretty sure they still serve wine. And then you couldn't be saved. The fact that you couldn't be saved, that's a big deal. So people did not want to be excommunicated. Other reforms were put in place by Leo. Good old Leo came in, kind of a governing body. This is where we start to see the Pope get some power here because he's overlooking everything and trying to make sure that, hey, let's get this under control. So the reforms brought him into conflict with political and religious leaders. Eventually, we see that many popes believe the Pope had no authority to tell them how to act, but he didn't see it that way, and he's going to stand by his morals. Now, here's your answer, number 25, and these 2 points there as I marked them down. What led to the split of the Christian church in 1054? Now, we talked about this briefly when we talked about the Byzantine Empire and talked about the history of the Byzantine Empire plus what was going on in Eastern Europe at the time, going back to chapter 12. Again, this goes back with Leo. Leo, remember, he is he is laying down the law. He's getting rid of corruption. He's saying, like, this is how we need to do things. He's gaining more of an authority. He's telling the Bishop of Constantinople, this is what you have to do. No longer of this, you need to do this. Well, the Bishop of Constantinople, not a very corrupt person, but also a very strong person, is like, look, I thought we were working together. I didn't see that you were this, big, massive figurehead, and that you, I'm putting in quotations, that you could come in and tell me what to do. And ultimately, there's a bit of a miscommunication. And so Leo's like, look, either you follow my rules or you don't do this. And basically, the bishop rejects them, and Leo's like, fine, you're excommunicated. And Leo might have gone a little too strong on the excommunication orders, like, you're excommunicated, you're excommunicated, you're excommunicated. Like, this is an Oprah Winfrey show, okay? You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. So no, Leo got a little carried away. But anyway, so we at one point in time we had the Orthodox Church, which wasn't Orthodox. It was the church in the church in Constantinople and the church in Rome working together, and then there was this split, and it all was because of Leo excommunicating this bishop out of Constantinople, and ultimately that's what led to what was the ultimately the church in Constantinople along the Greek area to be Greek Orthodox, and then Rome Church to be known as the Christian Church, so Christianity, Greek Orthodox, and the split and the two denominations. We do see that, so Leo called the Roman Catholics, and the bishop were the Orthodox. So, but again, your answer number 25 is right there in those 2 points. We're going to move forward. We do see the popes gain a little bit more influence because of Leo. He gets a little bit more power, gets into a little bit more politics here, really working with some of the leaders in Europe. So the Pope is now becoming a big member of the network in all of Europe. And not only is he dealing with religious matters, he's also getting into different other matters, different courts, and moral matters around these territories. Ruled certain territories as well, like the Papal States, held the ability to raise armies to defend the territory. Several popes hired Normans to fight the wars, and then crusades against the Muslims led by the popes. Now, there's some conflict over over the bishops, excuse me. Although the popes did start to increase their power, we see that bishops were kind of getting a little bit frustrated, especially the popes resolving some ways how to pick their clergy, and this is going to cause some issue over who's going to be a bishop, who's not going to be a bishop. So kings and other leaders in the past had an active role in choosing the clergy, like deciding, okay, you're going to be our preacher. As I take a sip here of my tea. So the kings had a little bit more of a way to say, you're the bishop and you get to dictate who's a part of your church and your clergy. And the Holy Roman Emperor named several popes as well. But with the reform coming, reform popes did not think anyone but the clergy should choose religious officials. And so they're telling the kings, like, look, you don't have the authority here anymore. It's the bishops and the popes. So the issue became critical during the Pope Gregory's pontificate. Sorry, can't read today. Pontificate. There we go. Henry the Fourth, Holy Roman Emperor at the time, chose a new bishop. The city of Milan. Gregory didn't approve of this. He was like, "Excuse me, again, you do not get to choose this." This happened in about 275 in northern Italy. Gregory did not approve and removed the bishop, and Henry disputed Gregory's authority. So there's a bit of a conflict of, no, I'm the king, so I get to say. No, but I'm the pope, I get to say. And eventually, what's going to end up happening is Gregory is going to use the power of excommunication. Ooh, and what does Gregory do? Well, then fine. If you're not going to listen to me, Henry, you can still be king, but you're excommunicated from the church. And what does Henry do? Oh, crud. I'm saved. I should be saved. And he's worried and blah, 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 blah. He goes, okay, fine. I changed my mind. Called on clergy, nobility of Germany to replace the emperor. Gregory tried to do, even with the excommunication. but we see Henry, fear of losing his throne. Henry traveled to Canossa to beg forgiveness, and reluctantly, though, Gregory lifted the excommunication, kept Henry as king, and it became a big deal. That excommunication thing was a big deal. However, that didn't really heal the relationship. Gregory and Henry still continued to fight over bishops for many years. But eventually, what this did is that it led to a compromise. Local clergy could choose the bishops. So at least the kings had some say through their local clergy. Most important outcome, though, is Gregory stood by and stood up to the emperor and said, "Look, I am the Pope. Either you're going to respect that authority or not." And that's what he did. And by doing that, he made himself to be a strong figure in Europe. We do see that some of the changes we see in reforms would ultimately lead a change in monasticism. We see that in early Middle Ages, monasteries were founded by men seeking lives of contemplation and prayer by being alone and worshiping God. The monasteries often were paid by local rulers and who chose their abbots who led them. We see this starts to turn around by the 900s as rulers stopped choosing qualified abbots. And this is your answer to number 27 right here. As I highlight that in red, your answer number 27. Why new monasteries were founded beginning in about 900 because of what? So number 27, because many abbots held positions only for prestige. And so we start to see this change, and we start to see that the Benedictine rule that had been followed is abandoned, and we start to go down different reforms of making sure to choose the correct abbots or the right abbots. In the early 900s, group of monks sought to return the monasticism to its strict roots and establish a new monastery at Cluny, France, to live by the Benedictine rule, and monks of the Cluny reserved the right to choose their own abbot under the Benedictine rule. So there's your definition too, right there for the Benedictine rule. Monks of Cluny reserved right to choose own abbot under Benedictine rule. Some kind of changed it, updated it, but some kind of stuck to the old school roots. But ultimately, we do see a bit of a change in the monasteries. Well, as we're wrapping up here, the network of monasteries with Cluny, very influential in Europe. Monks also established daughter houses. We start to see that women are now coming in also into the church as well. But we also see that other abbots were established, other monasteries in France, Spain, Italy adopted Cluny's customs, agreed to follow directions. Cluny became core of network of monasteries across Western Europe. For some monks, Benedictine life was not strict enough. Monks wanted to live free from worldly distractions and created new orders, most popular which was Cistercian order. So usually built outside of towns to ensure isolation. We see that undecorated, unheated during the winter. Monks divided time between prayer and labor. Other new orders were stricter as well, more like hermits. But we do see that some monasteries are changing and growing, and it's causing a big push in a different direction for a lot of those ways in the church. But the church is gaining some power and some strength. That's a good thing because the church kind of takes over a little bit more of the religious aspects and tries to be more like Christ. But as we start to see further along, as we go further into the Renaissance, that the church is going to get corrupt again. There's going to be more of a power struggle, and with that power struggle, there's going to be some problems and corruption, and things are going to cause problems, and ultimately it's going to pull some people away from the church. So we are going to talk about the church's power again when we get to chapter 15 and kind of get into the good and the bad and the ugly of the church as well during the time of the Renaissance. But we'll talk about that later. Again, the next lesson, I'm hoping to just do one section from chapter 14 talking about the Black Plague, especially since we're dealing with coronavirus. But we'll get into a little bit more of that later another time. Again, just be sure to fill out the Google Forms, or if you've got the packets from the school, pick those up and be sure to get those. Again, if you have any questions, email me at Weinlandp, WEINLANDP at Mannford at K12 or .K12.ok.us. All right. See you next time, guys. Have a good one.